I lived in a cabin on the edge of an Idaho national park. No power, no plumbing, and the nearest neighbor was not within walking distance. I was exactly 4 miles from the nearest paved road. At night, the only light on the property was whatever I could pull from a 200-meter flashlight beam. Every night at 12:47 in the morning, I heard footsteps that stopped exactly 30 meters from my door. I started sleeping in my car to stay safe. I was wrong. I moved out months ago, but the motion camera footage my roommate sent me afterward is the reason I will never set foot in those woods again. The cabin was a legitimate structure. Walls, roof, a wood stove, everything functional. What it did not have was power or running water, which meant no exterior lights, no electric alarm system, no way to illuminate the property at night beyond what a flashlight or lantern could do. The tree line came close on 3 sides. Dense coverage, the kind of forest that absorbs sound and light both, where you can hear something moving without being able to see it even with a light source. The footsteps started in the first week. Not every night, maybe 4 or 5 nights out of 7. After midnight usually. The specific sound of weight on dry leaves and pine needles moving deliberately through the trees on the north side of the cabin. What made them distinct from animal movement was the pattern. Animals in the woods move irregularly. They stop and start. They change direction. They produce sounds that fit the behavior of a creature navigating terrain. These footsteps moved at a consistent pace and then stopped cleanly, in the same spot, night after night. The thickest section of cover on the north side, where the undergrowth was dense enough to stand in without being visible from the cabin even in daylight. I told myself deer. I told myself it was the specific acoustic quality of that terrain making animal movement sound more deliberate than it was. I told myself a lot of things during the first month because the alternative required a response I was not ready to make. The second month, I started sleeping in my car. I had parked it about an acre from the cabin at the end of the rough track that connected the property to the access road. My reasoning was that whatever was in the woods was interested in the cabin specifically. The structure, the shelter, whatever it represented as a target. If I was not in the cabin, I was not in whatever that interest was directed at. The footsteps came to the car. Same pattern, same deliberate pace. Movement through the tree line on the north side, stopping at the thickest cover, this time approximately 30 meters from where I had parked. Staying there. I would lie in the back seat listening to the complete stillness in the woods and know something was standing in the dark 30 meters away watching a parked car. I made the decision to leave after the 3rd night of that. My roommate decided to stay. I thought he was making a mistake. Within 6 weeks, he had been robbed twice, both times while he was away from the property, someone accessing the cabin and taking specific items. He installed 4 battery-powered motion cameras covering the main approaches to the property. He sent me the footage 3 weeks after the cameras went up. A man walking onto the property from the tree line on the north side. Long rifle carried at his side. He walked to the thickest section of cover, the same spot where the footsteps had been stopping for months, and he sat up there, faced the cabin, and stayed. The footage showed this across multiple nights. The same man, the same approach, the same position in the same cover, standing or crouching in the bushes with a rifle, watching the cabin, the entire time we had been living there. I have thought about the car many times since seeing that footage. I thought moving to the car made me safer. I thought I was removing myself from whatever was focused on the cabin. What I was actually doing was parking an acre into an unlit property surrounded by the same tree line in a vehicle that can be seen from the outside while the person inside cannot see out clearly in the dark. I was not safer in the car. I was more isolated with less warning and less cover. The footage shows the approach path from the north tree line. The car was directly between that path and the cabin. I do not know if he watched the car on the nights I slept in it. I do not know if he adjusted his position when I moved out there. The cameras only went up after I left. What I know is that someone with a rifle was using the thickest cover on the north side of that property as a standing position to observe the cabin. Multiple nights, over a period that covered the entire duration of our tenancy. My roommate moved out 2 weeks after the cameras went up. He sent the footage to the National Park Rangers. They identified the approach path and documented it. They could not tell him who the man was from the footage quality. The cabin has been empty since. I have not been back. That one, the threat was confirmed by footage, something you can see and timestamp and show to a ranger. The next story is different. The only evidence in that one is a brass bell on a dog's collar, and where the bell ended up is what I still cannot account for. I have spent years in remote off-grid locations, mountain cabins, wilderness properties, the kind of isolation that requires planning for every contingency because the nearest help is measured in hours, not minutes. I am not someone who startles easily in the backcountry. The cabin in late fall was 40 miles of dirt road from the nearest town, below freezing at night. My dog Jake and I were the only living things on the property. Jake was wearing a brass bell on his collar. He wandered behind the cabin into the woods, and the bell moved through the trees for 40 minutes. Then it stopped. Jake came out of the woods in a full panic. Collar still on, bell gone, and then from somewhere deep in the woods behind the cabin, the bell rang. The cabin sat in a clearing roughly 200 meters across, forest on all four sides, a creek running along the eastern edge. No neighbors within any reasonable distance. No road access after the first snow of the season made the dirt track impassable, which had happened 4 days before the night I am describing. I was snowed in. That is the correct framing. Not isolated by choice, isolated by conditions, with one vehicle that could not navigate the track in current state, a satellite communicator for genuine emergencies, and enough supplies for another 2 weeks. Jake wore the brass bell so I could track him when he ranged in the woods, a practical decision in dense forest where a dog can move out of sight quickly. The bell was loud enough to carry clearly over a couple 100 meters in still air. Late evening, maybe 8 o'clock, he went around the back of the cabin and into the tree line on the south side. I could hear the bell moving through the woods. Normal ranging behavior, the sound shifting direction as he worked through the undergrowth. I tracked it by ear from the cabin porch for about 40 minutes, moving, pausing, moving again. Normal. Then the bell stopped. I waited 5 minutes. Called him. Nothing. I went inside and got the shotgun, came back to the porch. Jake came out of the tree line at a full run. Not the trot of a dog coming when called. A flat sprint, low to the ground, the specific movement of an animal in genuine panic. He hit the cabin porch and pressed himself against the wall and would not move from that position. I crouched next to him. His collar was still buckled around his neck. The bell was gone. The collar had a standard attachment ring for accessories. The bell had been clipped to that ring every day for 2 years without coming loose. The ring was intact. The clip that held the bell was intact. The bell was gone as if it had been removed deliberately while he stood still. I stood on that porch with the shotgun and looked at the tree line. 40 meters of open clearing between me and the south woods. No movement, no sound. Then the bell rang. From the woods, from somewhere deep in the south tree line, further in than Jake had any reason to have gone, the brass bell rang once, clear, unmistakable. The same bell, the same pitch I had been tracking for 40 minutes. From where no dog was. I stayed on that porch for a long time with the shotgun. Jake did not move from the wall behind me. I did not go into the south tree line that night or any of the remaining nights of that stay. I have spent a long time working through what the bell means. Jake came out of the woods with his collar intact and his bell gone. Something in those trees had taken the bell off the clip without Jake pulling free and running, which means either Jake stood still while it was removed, or it was removed from the collar while he was being held. Then the bell rang from deep in the tree line. I do not have an explanation for this that satisfies me. I have tried. A bell does not remove itself from a clip. A bell does not ring from deep in a forest with nobody in it. Something was in those trees while Jake was in there. Something that kept the bell. That story has a physical object I can account for. A bell that was on a collar and then was not, ringing from somewhere it should not have been. This last story has nothing physical. Just a Vietnam veteran, alone in the Montana wilderness, who encountered something on a night fishing trip that changed the entire rest of his life. My uncle was a Vietnam veteran. He did not talk much about the war, but the effect of it was visible in how he carried himself. A specific alertness that veterans from that era tend to have. An absence of the startle reflex that most people develop in civilian life. A calm in situations that would unsettle most people. He hunted elk alone in the mountains every fall. He backpacked solo. He was not someone who frightened easily. In 1992, he rented a small cabin deep in the mountains of western Montana. Nearest occupied cabin over a mile away. Access by a rough logging road. He went for a week of night fishing at a pond half a mile through the woods. He cut the trip short after the second night. He never returned to that cabin. He never spent another night alone in the wilderness for the rest of his life. The cabin was simple. 1 room, wood stove, a porch facing the logging road. The pond was accessible through half a mile of forest on a trail he had scouted on the first afternoon. He went out the first night without incident. Clear, cold, the kind of Montana mountain dark that has real weight to it. The second night, he was at the pond by 10. Around midnight, he heard it from the opposite shore. A guttural groaning. Low, sustained, the kind of sound that registers in the chest before the ears have processed it. He described it as nothing he had encountered in decades of time in the wilderness. Not a bear, not an elk, not any animal vocalization he could place. Then the sounds changed. What followed was something he described as several large primates fighting. An eruption of noise from the opposite shore, crashing and impact sounds. The specific quality of large bodies in violent contact with each other and with the surrounding vegetation. He said it lasted about 3 minutes. Then it stopped completely. The silence after was the part he returned to most when he talked about it. Not the sounds themselves, the silence that followed, which he described as the specific silence of a forest where everything else has also stopped. No insects, no frogs, no wind movement in the canopy. He started back toward the cabin. Something moved into the trees on his left. He heard it without seeing it. Movement in the undergrowth, keeping pace with him exactly. When he slowed, it slowed. When he moved faster, it matched him. It stayed just inside the tree line, never showing itself, covering the half-mile back to the cabin, stride for stride. He got inside and locked the door and every window. He sat with his rifle until sunrise. He told my father that the thing in the trees was aware of him in a specific way, not the awareness of an animal that has noticed a person and is reacting to the encounter. Something that had identified him and made a decision to follow. He cut the trip short the next morning and drove out on the logging road without stopping. My uncle lived another 22 years after 1992. He hunted, he fished, he spent time outdoors in every season. He never went back to that cabin. He never went alone into the wilderness overnight again. Not once in 22 years. That is the detail I keep returning to. A Vietnam veteran who had operated in conditions that would end most people, who had spent decades alone in remote wilderness, who was by every measure the least likely person to be permanently altered by a night in the woods. One night in western Montana in 1992. He never explained it further than what I have told you. He said there was nothing further to explain. He heard what he heard. Something followed him back, and he made a decision that morning on the logging road that he held for the rest of his life. Some decisions do not require explanation. They just require that you make them and do not go back.